To get started, I've loaded Visual Studio 2008 and I'd like to create a new project. To do that, I'll choose File, New, Project. And the first thing you should note on the New Project dialog box is that you can select the version of the .NET Framework that will host your application. This is a new feature in Visual Studio 2008. You couldn't do this before this version. That is, you couldn't create an application to run on an earlier version of the .NET Framework than the one that is most current. For most applications, you'll want to use the .NET Framework 3.5, although it's nice to know that you can create a .NET Framework 2.0 application using Visual Studio 2008. Next, you choose your language and the kind of project you'd like to create. I'm going to create a Windows project, and although I have lots of other choices, and we'll look at those choices, at least a lot of them, throughout this course, I'm going to start by choosing a Windows Forms application. Down here, you can select a name for your project. And I'll call it first Demo. And notice the solution name gets filled in with the same name as the name of your project. Now, what's the difference between a project and a solution? A solution can contain multiple projects. So you may want to give your solution a different name than the current project if you intend to add multiple projects to the solution. In this case, we don't, so I can leave the solution name the same as the project name. You can select a location for your project as well, so you can find it later on. I'll click OK, and this creates a new project within Visual Studio, actually a new solution within Visual Studio containing a single project. When you create a Windows Forms application, Visual Studio creates for you a form by default named Form 1 and opens that form in Design View, as we are right here. You'll notice also we have the Solution Explorer window, which shows us all of the items in the project, and the Properties window, which has the properties of the currently selected object. Right now, Form 1 is selected, and its properties appear in the Properties window. At the moment, I have the Solution Explorer and the Properties window set up on tabs. This isn't the default view, however. If you want to reset to the default view, you can choose on the Window menu, Reset Window Layout. It'll ask, are you sure you want to do this? And it will reset the window layout back to the default for the currently selected set of options in Visual Studio. I've chosen the General Development options, and these are the default layouts for the General Development option. Now, every item in your project has a name. It's a file, actually, on the hard drive, and you can change those names here. For example, if I choose Form 1 within my Solution Explorer, you see its properties down here. And I can either right-click and choose Rename and change the file name here, or I can select it and change the file name right here. Let's change the file name to something else, like myformfile.cs. So I'm telling this form file to change its name, and when I click Enter, it's going to ask, hey, you're renaming a file. Do you want to also rename every place that anything refers to this form? And I'll say yes, sure. When I do that, I also changed, let's select this form now, I also changed its name property. The name property of an item does not have to match its actual file name. That's just there for your convenience. If you want to change the name of this object so that when you refer to it in code, it will use a different name, feel free to change the name property of the form itself. For example, this really isn't a form file. This really is just a form. So I could call it my form instead. That doesn't change the name of the file, the object on disk, but it did change how I'll refer to this form in code any place I want to do that in my application. Notice that the caption of the form still says Form 1. It has no effect. The caption isn't affected by changing the name of the object. That's just set at the time the object is created to match the name of the object. That's a convenience for you, but you'll always want to change that to something else. You can do that by finding the text property of the form and changing it to whatever text you like. I'll change it here to hello, for want of anything better to say, and that changes the form's title bar caption. We can also find other properties to change. For example, the size property. The size property is made up of two components, a width and a height, and I can change each of those individually. And of course, as I do, it changes the layout of the form in the designer. I can also just click on the form and change the size manually. Watch the lower right-hand side of the screen as I do. It's changing the coordinates, and you can see the coordinates in the status bar. There's another way to change it. I can just collapse the size property and type in the values I want with a comma between them. Hit enter, and it resizes to the size I'd like. As you'll find in Visual Studio in most places, there is more than one way to solve almost any design time situation. Notice that the properties I've changed are marked in bold. It's not because I've changed them they're marked in bold, it's because their values are different than the default values for that property. So I should be able to, given that the properties have changed, right-click and choose Reset from the context menu. That puts the values back at their original default values. Same thing for text. If I wanted to, I could right-click, choose Reset, it would go back to its original default value, which actually was nothing at all. It got set to form 1 by the designer, but the default value was no text at all. I'll put it back to my value. There we go. And it's again marked in bold. So you can easily, visually, tell which properties have values other than their defaults by noticing that they're marked in bold in the Properties window. Because we've made changes, I'd like to save them. There are a number of ways to do that. I can choose the Save All toolbar button. Since I've only modified one item, I can choose to save it individually. On the File menu, I'll find the same two options, and in addition, I'll find a Save As menu item so I can change the name of the file on the disk. I'll choose Save All, and now I've saved everything in my project that I've modified. Well, obviously this form isn't very interesting, so let's add some functionality to it. To do that, I'll need to use the Toolbox window. If you don't see the Toolbox window here, you can come to the View menu and choose Toolbox to make it visible. Mine's already loaded. I just need to pin it down by choosing this pin here so it doesn't flop away from me and stays open the whole time. By default, the Common Controls tab is expanded here, although I can expand any of the other tabs as well. The All Windows Forms is every control that's available to you. The Common Controls is a subset of the ones you're most likely to use. You'll find other groups of controls down here as well, and we'll investigate a lot of these throughout this course. I'll start by placing a label control on the form, and there are a number of ways I can do that. I can double-click, and that places a label control in the upper left-hand corner of my form. If I repeat that for a text box, you'll see it cascades the location of the text box so everything's not crammed in the upper left-hand corner. In addition, you can just click and drag a control onto the form, allowing you to place it wherever you want. You may have noticed as I dragged that control on, a little blue line appeared. Let me show that again. If I move this around, you see a blue line appear on this end, and again on that end. These are snap lines, and they make it easy to align the controls on your form. Here on the left, here on the right, here, so I can align things horizontally, at the top maybe, or at the bottom, or even based on the text bottom. So the text on the two controls line up. I can do this for any number of controls. Let me get some more space here. Let me select both of these. I'll control-click to select them both, and I can drag them out of the way, drag this control down, and align it as well. So you'll find those snap lines very useful in laying out the controls on your form. The purple snap line aligns the text baseline, so you can have the text in each of your controls line up. There are a number of ways to adjust control sizes and positions. Like you've seen, you can click and drag to put things where you want it. You can use the Properties window. If If I want to set the size of this button to be wider than 75, I can just change the number right there. I can use the Format menu. This one's pretty useful. Let me show you this. Let me make this smaller again. Let's highlight both of these controls, and I do that just by clicking and dragging to select them both. Notice one control has black handles, the other has white handles. Just to prove a point, let me select them all. Okay. And now you can see that two controls have black handles and one has a white handle. We can, for example, use the one with the white handle to control the behavior of the others. It's easier to see this if I space them out better. There we go. Let's select them all. And now on the Format menu, I can, for example, align the lefts. And we'll align to the left-hand side of the one with the white handles. If you want a different one to have white handles, just click on it, and the white handles move to that control. Now we can format align the rights, and they'll all align to the right of the one with the white handles. Let's make the sizes the same. Let's go Format, Make Same Size, Width, and now these two controls have the same width, but this one does not. What's wrong with this picture? Let's go to the label alone and find its properties. There is a property that controls its size, the auto size property. If it's set to true, the label will always be just wide enough for its current text. If I set this to false, then it can resize to be any width you want. So let's try this again. Let me make this button narrower. There. And let's select them all. And now in the Format menu, Make Same Size, Width. And you can see now they all have the same width. We can align these again using this, but there are other ways to do it. Up here, if I select all three controls, you'll see I have align lefts, align centers, and align rights. And we'll align to the right of the one with the white handles. There we go. We can align tops, middles, or bottoms. We can make the same width, make the same height, make them both the same. Here we'd size to the grid, but since there is no grid currently showing, that's not available. We can make horizontal spacing equal. We're not doing anything with horizontal spacing now, but we can make vertical spacing equal. That's nice. We can increase the vertical spacing. We can decrease the vertical spacing or remove vertical spacing. Let's increase it back. We can center these horizontally on the form, center them vertically on the form. So we have lots of options using the Format menu or the Format toolbar to lay things out the way you'd like them. How about changing the height of the controls? Well, let's make some space here. Let me make this button taller. Let's see if we can make all the controls the same height. So, Format, Make Same Size, Height. Well, the button and the label work, but the text box does not. What's wrong with this now? If I go to the text box and look at its properties, there is a multi-line property which configures the behavior of this text box. By default, a text box can only contain a single line of text. If I want it to have more than one line, I need to set that to true, and now you can see the height of the text box matches the height of the other controls. Let's resize these, maybe that size. Select them all, make sure the button has the white handles, and let's make sure everything is the same size altogether. And there we go. Let's align them to the left. Let's decrease vertical spacing. And there we are. We have our three controls laid out, for the moment, the way we want them. You might also want to control the tab order. That is the order in which you would tab through the controls at runtime. Now you could go to each individual control and set its tab index property. That's 1, that's 2, and that's 0, but maybe you want them to appear in a different order. The easiest way to do that is not to change them manually here. That gets confusing. The easiest way is to come to the View menu and choose Tab Order. Now, once we display these little numbers, we can just click on each control in the order you'd like them displayed. I click, click, and click, and now they appear in the order I'd like them displayed on the actual form at runtime. To get out of this mode, I choose View, Tab Order again, and now you can see the tab index is 0, 1, and 2 for those 3 controls. We've laid out some controls on this form, but there must be some magic going on, because if I now run this application, I'll press F5 or click the Start Debugging button to run the application. You see that at runtime, our controls appear on this form. As a side note, by the way, the form itself supports clicking and dragging, resizing, maximizing, minimizing, and so on. We'll come back to that issue, but the first issue is, how did those controls that we laid out at design time get onto the form at runtime? If you're coming to C# from, say, VB6, well, in VB6, all of this was magic. It was hidden from you. In C#, however, everything is transparent. If we come to our Solution Explorer and expand myformfile.cs, we're going to find a myformfile.designer.cs. Before I go there, however, let's look at the code for this form itself. I'll choose View, Code, and you'll see here we have a public partial class named myForm. And within that class, we have a constructor, that is code that runs when this object comes into memory, which calls the initialize component procedure. Where is initialize component? It's not here. Where is this stuff? What does this partial class thing mean? Well, the fact is, if I come look at myformfile.designer.cs, I'll find another partial class myForm, and if I scroll down a little bit, I'll also find, hidden away inside this collapsed region, initialize component. So over here, in the code in your form, there is a partial class with a call to the initialize component procedure. The partial keyword indicates that this class, well, this partial class, and this partial class get compiled together into a single class at compile time. That's what the partial class keyword allows you to do. It separates designer-created code from user-created code, so that you can let the designer do its thing without overwriting your code the next time it generates this code for you. Because this is code that was generated by the Windows Forms designer. You can see the partial class myForm, and then down here at the very bottom, we find 3 variable declarations. Each one of these corresponds to one of the controls you've laid out on your form. We have a label named Label1, a text box named TextBox1, and a button named Button1, and each one is a variable that will refer to a control at runtime. Well, this initialize component procedure, what does it do? Well, as you can see, it creates instances of those 3 controls and assigns them into the variables. So it actually creates instances of some .NET Framework class for each control on your form. Before we investigate this farther, let's look a little higher up at this dispose procedure so you see what it's doing. The dispose procedure will always be there, and its point in life, and you'll really never need to change this, at least for most applications, this procedure, which will be called by the .NET runtime at runtime when you dispose of this form, this is called to ensure that if you dispose of the form manually, that also this components collection, which contains non-visible tools that you can drag onto your form, we'll learn more about those at a different point in the course, it ensures that those get disposed, removed from memory, at the same time you're disposing your form. Without that, you might have some memory leaks of components that are using some memory that wouldn't get released otherwise. We generally won't need to modify that, so I'll just skip ahead for now and go back to initialize component. Once we've created the instances of our 3 controls that we're using on this form, there's a call to the suspend layout method. Suspend layout does what it sounds like. It tells the form to suspend its layout until we've specified all the properties of the controls and then go poof and lay out all the controls at once. The next few blocks of code set the various properties of the controls on the form. Remember those properties that were marked in bold on the form at design time? Well, those are properties that are set here in the code. This code says at runtime, when you're laying out this form, set the location of the label to be here, set the name to be this, its size to be this, and so on, for each of the controls on the form. It does the same for properties of the form itself and adds each control one at a time to the controls collection of the form, so the form knows it owns these children controls, so they appear on the form. It sets a few more properties of the form itself, then resumes layout and performs the layout. So therefore, at the end of this procedure, all of the controls appear with the correct properties at the correct locations on the form, and you see the form display. That's a lot of code for so early in the course, but as you can see, it's not hard code, and also, we'll never need to look at it again for the most part. Oh, one thing you should note, if you make changes in here, and you can, it's just code, let's say I change the text of label 1 from being label 1 to, say, click me. That's not what a label does. Let's say something like enter your name. I was thinking of a button. Enter your name here. Let's go back to our design surface, which is here, and you'll see we've modified the text of that label. And that's fine. You can either modify it here or you can modify it here. There's no problem. But you should note the comment, required method for designer support, do not modify the contents of this method with the code editor. Sure, you can make changes to specific properties if you want, but you can break things too. Remember our tab index was set to 0, 1, and 2? If you made this be 1, what does that mean for our form at runtime? It can't be a good thing. So don't modify things here in the code editor unless you really know what you're doing. In addition, if you were to rearrange the layout so it fit your needs better, or if you were to come in, add your own comments here, you can kiss that comment goodbye, because the next time that Visual Studio needs to regenerate the code based on this, it's removed your comment, because it recreated this code at the point that we switched back to the code view. So in any case, don't modify this code unless you really know what you're doing or have a reason to do so. You can always modify properties at runtime by writing code to set values, but you don't want to modify this code in the code editor unless you have a good reason to do it.